Hey viewers, my name's Cara. This video is going to be a little bit stream of consciousness probably, but I do have a main topic in mind. I want to talk about one of the things that I've been doing throughout this past month or 2 months, which is something that I believe I mentioned in a previous video, and it's something that I kind of had heard about for the first time a few years ago and wanted to do, but didn't really get around to actually making the time to do it until this year, and that is decolonizing my bookshelf. There is a post from Ally Henny, which I have shared before, and I'll put up on the screen here, about kind of what that means. And so what I want to talk about is the process that I have taken for myself and the steps, literally like step by step, how I've been doing it so far. So that is kind of what it's about, generally getting rid of anything that's already on your bookshelves that is by authors who are knowingly problematic in one way or another. But it's also, for me, starts with knowing more about the authors on my bookshelf, because there are certainly some authors whose books I have and I feel like I know a good deal about the author, but there are far more authors, poets, and playwrights on the shelves in my home that I don't really know a lot about the author. So I just want to kind of go through step by step how I started doing this. So some of my books are behind me here, but this is by no means all of my books. And this is also a bookshelf down here, so there's a couple of shelves of books below. There are 2 bookshelves across the room from me, both short ones, so 2 shelves and 2 shelves. And there's another one in the other room. I also have stacks of books on the floor right next to me on both sides. No, just over here right now. I've kind of moved them all over in front of this bookshelf because there's another bookshelf that I have that I used to use for books, but it currently now is displaying my teapot collection, because when we moved into this house, I didn't have a place to put all my teapots, because in the previous apartment we had space on top of our kitchen cabinets, so my teapots were up there and I had books on this other shelf. But we moved here, teapots are on the one shelf, so there are books literally just everywhere in my house, like on every surface. Actually, yeah, there's a stack of books on the steamer trunk that we use as a coffee table. It's a book table, basically. There's a stack of books there, stack of books on this table that the computer is on. So yeah, there are just books everywhere in my house. And it's also, now it is my personal collection of books combined with my partner's books. So what I decided for this, because I know that my partner's books are a little more diverse than mine, I really wanted to just start by looking at my books, the things that I personally have collected over the years. And I wanted to do that because I didn't want to kind of stack the deck, so to speak, by including all of my partner's books, which I already know are a little more diverse than my personal collection. Because, for example, the entire shelf behind me here is manga, and so that's all my partner's, and that, you know, including all of those authors and illustrators would greatly diversify the sort of demographics that we see in our collected home library. But I didn't want to use that to kind of tip the scales. I wanted to look at my personal books that I've collected, you know. So this is how I started. I started with this shelf up here, which is my collection of plays and poetry. I did include a couple of books that actually are my partners, or were my partners before we combined them. So like I included the couple of poetry books that are actually my partners, because there's really only 2 of them up there that are my partners, and the rest were my acquisitions. But then I didn't include most of the manga or graphic novels, other graphic novels, unless they are an author that I personally have also read myself, such as we have a couple by Neil Gaiman. So when we get there, but that's just kind of, that was my thought process. Like if they're an author that I have also read, I included that author's name on the list because I've also read them and I might even have other books by them. otherwise I didn't really include all of those. But I went through all my plays and poetry because that's what's up there, and on this shelf behind here, that's a bunch of Hamlet actually right behind the mask. This is a new mask that my mom sent me, by the way. So I went through and just wrote down the names, and I put it in this I have this little notebook that I've had forever, and I just started writing names in 2 columns, and all of the authors' names, so there's about 50 to 60 names on a page, I guess, depending on how I squeezed them in there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 pages like that. So I am not done going through them, but first step was just going through my bookshelves and writing down all of the names of the authors, playwrights, poets. Then once I had all of them written down, I've literally just been going on my search engine on my phone. I'm actually not Googling them. I'm using my Ecosia search bar because they plant trees for every so many searches that people use. And I still get the Wikipedia result. So I've been using that one to add to my tree planting count. That's just a little, but you could Google it, whatever. I've been researching each author's name, and typically I'm just going to the Wikipedia page and reading about them there. The main thing that I'm looking at is where are they from and what would their race be considered, because what I'm mainly looking at is how overwhelmingly white and like European centric is my bookshelf, is my book collection. European and American centric, really, mostly, like American and British, how much of that is there? And what I want to see is how many books do I actually have that are by authors who are members of marginalized groups, whether that's race or a marginalized religious group. Obviously, I have a lot of witchy books, so that when I get to that section is going to be a little more diverse in that regard. But in the race category, maybe not so diverse. Or in the gender and sexuality categories, so I'm looking at what sort of sections of my library are overwhelmingly white men, cis men, heterosexual men even, and how many books do I have that are by female authors, that are by authors of color, Black authors, Indigenous authors, authors who are neurodivergent as opposed to neurotypical, disabled authors, anything like that. I'm trying to just figure it out because there's a lot of authors that I don't know a lot about. So yeah, for the most part, I'm just reading Wikipedia, and a lot of it's in there, especially in the like personal life or early life categories, That's where I'm finding a lot of the really interesting stuff. And if there's anything that says like the main themes of their works, I'm looking at that too, because I want to see what kind of things does this person write. So there's a lot of people I've been looking up where it doesn't say much about them as a person. Maybe they're a white American author, but then it says that their works typically are about feminism or social justice or anarchism or whatever. And so I'm writing those things down too, just because it's interesting to me, and I want to include any kind of background in that variety that can tell me a little bit more about the diversity of views that these authors might hold. Because depending on what the book is, like if it's a fiction book, I have a lot of fiction, that doesn't necessarily tell you the political stance of the author, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to, but especially like today when we have J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, coming out very publicly saying transphobic and anti-transgender things, it becomes relevant. That doesn't mean that Harry Potter all of a sudden is awful. And, that's a thing that a lot of Harry Potter fans, I think, now are navigating. What is our involvement going to be with the franchise? I actually don't own the books anyway, so it's not a thing that I'm going through. Do I keep the books? Do I not keep the books? But like, I don't think it's so much like now Harry Potter himself is a transphobe. That's not the case. But I think it is important and relevant to know who we are supporting when we buy things, when we buy books brand new, when we support that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that books about magical fantasy stories about witches are no longer liked, but maybe supporting openly trans exclusionary people by giving them book deals, maybe that's the thing we don't want to do anymore. So in case any of you were unclear or unsure or wondering, I do not support J.K. Rowling's views about transgender individuals. J.K. Rowling is a TERF, and I'm not here for it. Anyway, that's not what this video is going to be about, but it is relevant because that's the kind of thing we're talking about, is realizing maybe how much we don't know about the authors whose books are on our shelves. Now, for me, a lot of the books that I have were indeed purchased secondhand or from thrift stores or from library book sales. So a lot of the books that I have actually did not give any additional money to the author or to the publisher, because authors don't necessarily make a ton of money off their books, depending on who they are, but the publisher even more so would. And so, yeah, a lot of the books that I got, they were secondhand. They were out of that kind of initial stream of income. So I do have that aspect going on. And if it's an author who I do know today and I really like them and I really support them, then I might try to save up money and actually buy their book directly from them in order to support them. So I do that when I can, because that is important. That is what we're doing. When we buy a book, we are supporting that book. We are telling that publisher that we support that book, and we want more books like that because books like that are gonna sell. And it's all connected, right? So we might not be thinking of that when we pick out books, but that is what's happening. So there have just been a couple instances where I've had to go a little further than Wikipedia because maybe the author's Wikipedia page doesn't really say anything about who they are as a person, but maybe it links to their website. So sometimes I've gone to the website and read the About Me section to see how are these people actually identifying, and are they disclosing any kind of identity. And not that they have to, but is there information given about whether or not they are part of a minority group that maybe at first glance we didn't know they were, or based on the type of writing that they do we might not know. So I've been feeling a little bit like a detective in the sense that, like, I'm just having a lot of fun reading about these things and learning little tidbits that are, they're right there on the Wikipedia page, but I've never looked it up before, or maybe I did before and I forgot, I don't know. So I guess I just want to go through and point out a couple of the really interesting things that I wrote down, or like just some of the kind of stuff that I wrote down so you know what I'm doing. So a lot of the plays, like starting out here just as an example, I wasn't, when I first started, going through and reading the entire Wikipedia articles. So in the first ones, I just have written down things like Aristophanes, Greek, Bertolt Brecht, German, Anton Chekhov, Russian, Noel Coward, British, George Farquhar, Irish, I don't even know if I said that correctly, John Gay, English, etc., etc. And then we have Lorraine Hansberry, Black American, woman. So I have marked a little symbol there, and also a little asterisk, meaning that they are a person of color. Because then what I'm doing is at the end of each section or each page, I'm going through and counting, okay, how many names were on this page? And then out of that many names, how many are people of color? How many are women? How many are whatever else I'm counting, whatever else came up on that page. So we have Lorraine Hansberry, Raisin in the Sun. It's back there on that shelf. The first person of color and the first woman on my bookshelves when we start from up there. So basically lots of white men in my plays section is what I learned. And that's not something that I consciously realized before. My degree is in theater arts, for those who don't know, and I collected a bunch of plays that were relevant to playwrights that we had learned about in the history of theater class that I took. And, if I was at the half-price bookstore and I saw, Beggar's Opera, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll grab a copy of that. I should have that, as a theater person. And I wasn't really thinking about how many of those are written by white men. Not all British, but all sort of those European-based countries that I just named. But I am writing down the specific countries too, because especially when we get into things like my pagan and witchy books, I think that an Australian author has a significantly different perspective than an American author or a European author because they have a Southern Hemisphere perspective. A Brazilian author, same thing. So like kind of anybody south of the equator, I feel like that is a significantly different perspective in itself. So I'm writing that down too, just for my own sort of knowledge. But I am definitely focusing on trying to see how many books I have, how much representation is in my personal collection from authors of color, specifically Black authors, but also any other non-white identities, and specifically Indigenous as well, because there's not a lot of them on my bookshelf. And that's what I'm trying to figure out, is see how many, and then focus on seeking out more books that provide different perspectives and different backgrounds and life experiences. So that's kind of what I did for the plays and the poetry. I didn't really write down a whole lot else very specific other than that. So in the plays, I had 66 playwright names, 3 of whom are people of color. I believe all of those were 2 Black American playwrights, Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson, and 1 Venezuelan, Moises Kaufman, who wrote the Laramie Project. 8 women, and 1 of whom is Jewish. I am also noting, different religious beliefs, and especially those whose Wikipedia page mentions that they are Jewish, and maybe that they had family who were Holocaust survivors or who were lost during the Holocaust. That is a significant perspective. That is a marginalized identity. So I'm writing down things like that too. And so that's kind of out of 66 names, 8 female playwrights, 3 playwrights of color, non-white playwrights. Like, that's not a lot. And so that's the kind of thing that I need to be looking at and seeing, wow, okay, my plays shelf is very white. And that's not even looking at, like, I have the entire collection of William Shakespeare plays, so I'm not counting, like, 30 times for that person. This is just their name. This is just one. If we were looking at individual works that I have, it would be even worse, because I have 1 play by Lorraine Hansberry. I have 1 play by August Wilson. I have all of Shakespeare, on my first page of, like, some of the nonfiction books. It's kind of a mix, actually. There's some nonfiction, some fiction books that are on the bottom shelf behind me you can't see. Out of 20 names, 1 is a non-white author of color, and 2 female authors. Again, not a lot. So then I'm going into my fiction section, which starts with the shelf kind of behind me here. All of a sudden I noticed there are many more female authors in my fiction works. So then, I'm noticing things that I'd never noticed before. And I'm learning things that I didn't know before. So a couple interesting things. 1, Catherine M. Valente, who wrote the Fairyland novels, which you can't even see. They're hiding behind this, like, pile of junk over here. But the Fairyland novels, the girl who circumnavigated Fairyland in a ship of her own making, that series, S.J. Tucker, who is a pagan singer-songwriter, musician, has a whole album of songs called Wonders that is based on the first book in that series, which is how I found out about that series and found out about Catherine M. Valente. So in reading her Wikipedia page, I learned that her book or series, Palimpsest, won the Lambda Award for LGBT sci-fi and fantasy. I didn't know that before. That's pretty cool, so I just wrote that down. The next thing was Bruce Coville, who wrote some of my favorite little paperback books when I was young about unicorns, Into the Land of Unicorns. I never knew, as a kid, until a couple weeks ago when I looked him up, that Bruce Coville is bisexual. And I also got to confirm one of the things that I liked about these books as a kid is that the main character's name is Cara, and it's spelled the same way as my name. Of course, it doesn't give, like, the pronunciation, but due to other things in the story, which I won't tell you just in case you ever want to read these and care about spoilers, there are things that are revealed throughout the story. I have this one and the sequel that lead me to believe that it is meant to be pronounced Cara. And in the Wikipedia article, it mentions that that is Bruce's daughter's name. So that's something that I had kind of always wondered, as a kid, like, oh, maybe he knows a Cara. There you go. It was named for his daughter. And yeah, so cool little things like that. I've also been writing down when different authors have pen names that I didn't know about, or I didn't know that the name I know them by is a pen name. So I'm writing that stuff down, just, little information that I would like to know. But then, yeah, I'm still writing down, this is a white American author. This is an white English author. This is a Japanese British author, French, Japanese autistic author. I learned from Wikipedia that Margaret Atwood, who is Canadian, is or was a pescatarian and an environmental activist. That makes sense based on the books that I've read by her. There are also a couple authors who no information came up for them. I don't know if it's a pen name, maybe they only published one book, or I don't know, but I couldn't find them. There wasn't a Wikipedia page, and I also couldn't find them even by looking up the book. I could find the book, but then it wouldn't link to any information about the author. So just kind of like a little random novel that I got like passed to me from a friend, so kind of thing. So with those, I just put a question mark next to them and I moved on, and then I didn't count them in my little sort of wrap up. So like for my first page of fiction authors' names, which I wrote down a bunch of little stuff, anything that I thought was kind of like significantly interesting. Holocaust survivor, 2 authors in a row who just the books happened to be next to each other on the shelves. I had 2 in a row that were both written by Vietnam vets, even though that's not what both books are about, and they just ended up on the shelf next to each other. And then right after that, I had 2 in a row, 2 different authors whose Wikipedia page talks about them dealing with substance abuse throughout their life, and that sometimes that influences their work or they write about it. I just thought it was really interesting that like I keep having these little sections of my bookshelf where I have authors placed next to each other randomly. It's not even alphabetized. It's not really by subject other than these are fiction. And I have like books that I look at more frequently in the front, and then I have books that I look at less frequently in the back shelf because these are too wide. So it's just kind of weird that like 2 of them next to each other just happen to have such a big thing in common. So I wrote that down. There's one author who, and I have a bunch of these books because of my World Lit class in college actually. So if not for my World Lit class, my fiction section would probably be significantly less diverse looking because it's World Lit, so it was literature from all around the world. But there is one author who was born in Germany to Polish parents, moved to the UK, lived in the UK most of their life. Their parents are Jewish also, and then they married an Indian and moved to India. And so there's all these different influences because now they write mainly from an Indian perspective. And so their last name is Indian because it's their spouse's name, but their personal background is Polish, German, Jewish, British, like very complex. And so it's not always as easy as American. So I'm writing those things down when the information is available. I'm not doing like a full-on investigation into each person, but I am like reading what's on the Wikipedia page, maybe going to their website if there's nothing on the Wikipedia page kind of thing, But yeah, a lot of authors that I'm learning from their Wikipedia page are gay, who I didn't know were gay, or queer, who I didn't know were queer, bisexual, who I didn't know were bi, etc., etc. So I'm learning a lot about authors that I just had no idea, had never really thought to question it. Doesn't come up in the book. It's not part of their author bio. It's something that comes up in the like personal life section on Wikipedia, maybe, if it's relevant. I'm sure there are a lot of other people whose Wikipedia page doesn't even say anything about that because that's not relevant to their career. So maybe they don't talk about it. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I find interesting. Also, just like random facts that I wrote down. Agatha Christie, okay? Agatha Christie's play, The Mousetrap, has been being produced live on stage in the West End in England since it first opened in 1952, consecutively until 2020. It only closed down because of the coronavirus pandemic. Like that was just a thing that I had never realized and never known before, that it's actually been being produced consistently from 1952 until now. It's considered the longest running play ever. How did I not know this as a theater person? You know, so I just thought that was really interesting. And like, if not for the COVID-19 pandemic, that play would still be being produced continuously in the West End. The run would just keep going. Like, how wild is that? How absolutely unbelievable, right? But anyway, so my first page of, thank you for listening to this ramble. I said it would be kind of stream of consciousness. The first page of fiction authors' names, 49 names on this page, 9 of whom are non-white, people of color, 22 women, 7 people in the LGBTQIA2S plus community somewhere, 4 Jewish, and 1 autistic author. And I know that I have other books by autistic authors, but I just haven't gotten to them yet. So, you know, that'll be something that I write down as well, because that's another thing to keep in mind, like neurodivergent authors. So yeah, I still have a couple pages to go. Yeah, I have 2.5 pages to go. I haven't gotten to my pagan and witchy books yet. The last one I looked up was Claudia Mills, who I have 1 book by her, and I read it when I was about 10 years old. It was given to me by my 5th grade teacher. I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier books this year, one of my earlier videos this year, where I was talking about books that have really influenced me. And she's one of the authors that the Wikipedia page doesn't say anything, so it has a link to her website. I went to her website, I read the About Me section, and you know, she's a white American female author, but I noticed that on her website it said that she is a professor of philosophy now and loves to hear from her readers, because she apparently has published way more children's books and like young adult fiction books than I ever knew. I've only read one of them. I'd only ever heard of one of them. She's written a ton of books, and she's a philosophy professor, and her website says she loves hearing from readers. So I actually stopped and wrote her a really long story about how her one book that I had read impacted me, because it's about a girl who was a lot like I was in school, straight A's, teacher's pet, you know, whatever, very proud of her academic achievements and never wanted to do poorly because it was like part of her identity. And then it's about her struggling with biology class when they have to do dissections, because she is morally opposed to dissections and wants to be a vegetarian, which I also did as a kid. So I wrote Claudia Mills this long email story about how every day when I finally got into AP biology in high school, I had read the book back in like 5th grade going into 6th grade, but several years later when I was finally facing dissections myself, I thought about her book every day and like how it impacted me. It was one of the first times I had ever seen a discussion about like veganism and vegetarianism. And so there's, as she pointed out to me in her reply, that kind of discussion of like people's beliefs and values is what made her want to become a professor of philosophy. So I wrote her this huge long email. She wrote me back. She loved, you know, she read the entire thing and wrote me back, and she was like, I've printed this out to keep forever. This was amazing. I thank you so much. And so that's just another little like cool thing that came out of this. And she wrote me back and was telling me some of her favorite books from when she was a young person and when she was that straight A student, kind of like the character in the book that I identified with. It was also kind of based on her own experiences and her own struggles with dissection and stuff like that, and having a friend who debated with her about her morals back at this time as a kid, and it made her want to become a professor of philosophy. And so she's telling me about some of her favorite books and how they had an influence on her. And so that's just like another little random cool thing that came out of this project. And I explained to her in the email, I am going through a process of decolonizing my bookshelf, which means I'm looking at how many of my books on my shelves were written by cis het white men, how many were written by women, how many by Black authors, etc., etc. I told her all of this. I said, you know, I'm going to tell you a little story about how your book impacted me as a 5th grader, But I also told her about me today. I said I'm a pagan, a witch. I'm like the only one who was out at the time in my school. I think I'm actually, like, looking back on it now, I don't remember anyone else coming out as gay or bi or anything like that when I was in high school, at least not in the years that I was there. You know, maybe in previous years people had come out, but in the years that I was there, I'm the only person that I know of that came out as bi. And, you know, so all of these things, I told her I work at the Buckland Museum, or I work with the Buckland Museum. I don't know if I can really say I work at the museum right now because I'm not working there in person because of pandemic, and also because I still haven't been able to get my car fixed, again, because of pandemic and quarantine. It's been really difficult to get in there and make an appointment. We can't even, like, call them. They keep, you know, they're understaffed and they're closing early, so it's just been really difficult. So I'm not at the Buckland Museum, but I work with them, we can still say. And she just thought that was the coolest thing. And so, yeah, you never know what's gonna come up when you decolonize your bookshelf and start researching people. So yeah, that's just kind of my process, and I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more about a lot of these other authors. Like I said, I am not done. I haven't even gotten to the witchy and pagan books yet, and those are kind of the last ones that I wrote down. I have so many books to get through. And in addition to that, last thing I wanted to mention, and I'm losing daylight here, back at the start of quarantine, I don't even remember which month, March or April maybe, Katie Flowers's book club was getting ready to read a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And my partner, who is a librarian, put it on hold for me at the library, but it was right before everything shut down. And so we knew that it was probably gonna take a while to get here. But then quarantine shut everything down, right? The library system stopped operating. Time goes by. I've completely forgotten about this book. And guess what came into the library yesterday? My copy that we put on hold of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. So I am going to be reading this quite a bit after Katie's book club, because they've already finished it, you know, they're past this. But I had completely forgotten that we placed a hold on it at all, and now it's here finally, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is an Indigenous author, and I don't think I can say there are many, if any, other Indigenous authors already on my bookshelves of the books that I own. So I definitely use my local public library system. You know, I talk about this all the time, but I definitely appreciate the accessibility of being able to read different books without having to buy them. Although, as we've said, since we do want to support certain people, when we decide that there is an author that we want to support, it is best to buy their book directly from the publisher. Even is great, rather than getting it secondhand. But for financial accessibility reasons, which I really need to take advantage of at the moment, I don't have a big budget for books anymore, unfortunately. So I love being able to get things through the library system. So this is the newest thing that just came in for me to read, which is by an Indigenous author. I'm very much looking forward to it. I am also still reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, which I've talked about before. And I recently finished reading When They Call You a Terrorist, which I previously did a video talking to you about here on this channel. And I'm still rereading The Spiral Dance by Starhawk with a group through my Patreon. Info about that is always below, the link to my Patreon account and such like that. So yeah, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that process that I'm going through, how I am decolonizing my bookshelf. For me, it starts with looking at who is already there and looking them up and reading the Wikipedia page and just learning stuff about them that I didn't know. Things about their identity, things about their background, their life circumstances and life experiences that I didn't necessarily know when I just picked up their book, maybe even already read the book. But that doesn't tell you a whole lot about the author's lives necessarily, unless it's a memoir or a biography. So yeah, thanks so much for watching and or listening to this video. Let me know in the comments if you are working on decolonizing your bookshelf. If you're further along than me, what's the next step been for you? You know, it might be obviously purchasing books from different authors to support their work. Yeah, let me know your thoughts or your own process for this in the comments. And thanks to Ally Henny for the post that I have been sharing to people to reference. And yeah, I will see you all next time. I hope you are doing as well as possible. I hope you're doing great, but I know realistically a lot of us are probably not feeling great, so I've been saying I hope you're doing as well as possible, as well as can be. In all actuality, I hope you're doing even better than that, but I know we might not all feel that way. It's my hope anyway. So thank you so much for watching and or listening. Like I already said, I'm gonna go. I'll see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.